Now we are.
Needless to say, purposely wore the orange sweater in honor of Halloween. So couldn't tell my decor. All right, so welcome everyone. Let's just bring ourselves up to date and what we're doing and what needs to be done and things like that. So, again, in terms of we reached a crossroad from last class is that we finished all of chapter 1, very much in the rearview mirror. Everyone here is good working handle on what is an estate and different kinds of trusts and identify all sorts of different kinds of trusts. That's the good news. Chapter 2 deals with the fact that trusts are subject to tax. Trusts and estates much in the same way as any other entity is under the code or subject to the same rules that we're used to throughout the entirety of subtitle 1 of the Internal Revenue Code, namely the income tax. So chapter 2 is a reflection of that, and I can't resist passing pages 57, 58, 59, dealing with things that we've seen before. This deals with manufacturers Hanover, and the one twist in all this is the non-deductibility of those expenses related to their production of tax-exempt income. And we said, you guys have seen it, computer does it for you, but you got to be able to explain to a client they want to know why they're not getting a full deduction with respect to these trustee fees and the like, and you have to explain it to your client. And then that gets taken into account for purposes of computing the D&I as well as ultimately the income distribution deduction. Schedule B reflects it. So again, when you get a chance, I said to you before, I'll stand by what I said, is that when you first looked at these pages, they would look hard, very hard to distill and digest. I'm hoping by this stage of the course, guys, that you can look through these pages and feel some sense of satisfaction, that you can follow along with the numbers. Again, focus heavily on the IRS's perspective, not the taxpayer's perspective, because the taxpayer did not prevail. So it's an interesting exercise to see what happened there, but that's not going to win you any brownie points anyway. All right, so we went through the entirety of chapter 2, and we just saw some nuances of how trust and estates are taxed compared to other taxpayers. Chapter 3, we spent several classes talking about chapter 3 and the entity as a conduit, and we said that trust and estates occupy this unique world. Unlike an S corporation or partnership, which is a complete flow-through entity, and gains and losses pass right through to the beneficiary vis-a-vis K1, and that's on one hand. And on the other hand, you have C corporations, which nothing passes through and never passes through. So that you have on the other hand, and then I don't know if you want to say right down the middle, you have trust and estates, which enjoy two ways, or 2 times, how do I say this, that income and deductions will pass through beneficiaries. And that can be on an annual basis, and we know that through distribution deductions, and that it's picked up on a K1 with the ceiling amount being D&I. And the second time, and I'm not trying to be cryptic, but deductions, in particular NOLs and capital losses and excess deductions, can be picked up vis-a-vis Code Section 642H. So all I'm making the observation is that this conduit principle applies throughout the life cycle of a trust or an estate. Again, vis-a-vis distribution. Losses are never going to be distributed. Everyone agree? That losses never, ever pass through a trust or an estate until the final bells toll. okay? No pun intended, okay? The tolls being the final year, and only in that year can losses possibly pass through. All right? So, chapter 3 begins with a quick reflection of what is income, what is a gift, why? Because gifts, as we know from your income tax days, are exempt from tax under 102, but 102B says, no, 102A doesn't apply to the income generated on gifts and bequests, and by extension, the whole subchapter J regime turns on that. All right, so just turning pages in chapter 3, the authors define for us what is D&I, most importantly, what is excluded from D&I, not always, but many times. Fill in the blank, you guys are all thinking it.
Capital gain.
Capital gains, thank you, Dave. Capital gains, right? So, capital gains, but depending on the circumstances, sometimes capital gains is part of the equation. So, D&I, you need to know D&I. D&I is a critical metric for deciding what is taxable and what is not to the recipient. And then as I'm turning pages, we looked at what is a simple trust. Trust gets a deduction under 651, inclusion under 652, and then we have a complex trust or slash estate, 661, 662. I saw a nice outline. I haven't perused it carefully. Alicia, did you get that?
I glanced.
You glanced at it. Did everyone get that?
Yeah,
My emails?
it looks good.
I mean, it looks promising, and it may be something useful if you go through it, and you find it useful, shoot me an email and say, hey, this was good. If you find it problematic, let me know. But on the face of it, I looked through it for about 15, 20 minutes. I thought, again, this book, I wouldn't be trying to write a new one if I thought this was the perfect book. You don't see me trying to write a new income tax book, because notwithstanding its shortcomings, I think it's very useful. This one, again, since I'm on tape, I better be careful in case my friend Mark and Bob are listening to me. It's a good one, but it's a little, no offense, guys, it's a little bit out of date now, okay? Right? And things like that. So let's just test the water here. Aside from getting an outline on the material, did everyone just get about 15 minutes ago? So if you haven't checked your email in about 15 minutes, just sent an email regarding material, not for next class, but in 2 classes from now, dealing with charitable trust and IRD. Did you guys get that? You haven't checked your email?
Something
Okay,
came.
We got it, yeah.
I was driving.
You're
so-
driving.
Yeah, something came.
So, okay. You heard a bang or?
No,
I saw
it
it
came
on my
through,
phone.
yeah.
Okay, it came through. Okay, well, you were stopped at a light, right? You saw.
No, I didn't look. No, I was driving. I had my phone. Like,
Oh, it's in, okay.
it's like,
Gotcha. Okay. All right, so we're getting up to date on these things. All right, so, as I'm just turning pages, everyone can go through this material. Again, if for exam purposes, we try to keep it really simple and just like the exam questions you saw before, nothing complicated. Trying to keep it at a level 2 or 3 on the 10 scale of complexity. We know about Code Section 663, that if there is a specific request or distribution which can be made in 3 or less, can be distributed in 3 or less, how do I say, payments, it qualifies under 663, and it should not pull out with it any D&I. We looked at Code Section 642, and then we spent a good hour or so talking about something near and dear to everyone here. And again, you would expect that I would ask a few questions, so I don't want anyone to act surprised on the application of Code Section 643E, which says what, EK? Remember? Just say it loudly, because otherwise Edward and others can't hear you. got? Dane?
So it's related to the treatment of property distributed in kind, and it's the basis of the beneficiary.
Okay, so property is being distributed in kind, keep going.
The basis of any property received by the beneficiary in distribution from the state or trust shall be the adjusted basis in the hands of the state or trust immediately before the distribution, adjusted for any gain or loss.
Okay, so generally when property in kind is being distributed, the property that is distributed, the recipient will take a basis, a carryover basis, right? Everyone agree? And how does that impact, Carlo, the amount of income they have to pick up? You know? What does the code say in that context? In other words, if property in kind is being distributed to you, do you pick up its adjusted basis or you pick up its fair market value?
Adjusted basis.
Adjusted basis, B, agree or disagree?
You could choose, right?
Can you choose, David?
Oh, no,
I'm not
it's
sure.
one or the other, whichever one is lower.
Yes.
Yes.
It's the lesser of the two,
Yes.
right, Carlo? It's the lesser of the two. You'll pick up the lesser of the two, subject to the cap of D and I, right? And the executor, we said under 642E3 can elect to recognize the gain, but not too often will that happen, right? So we went through several problems that were designed to illustrate that proposition. And again, I'm not saying this as a threat, I'm saying it, hey, my holiday is in your hands, meaning if you do well, I'll feel like it's going to be a great 2019, bodes well for 2019. But if you don't do so well on the exam, I'll be like, well, this isn't going to be ushering in a good season. So I need you guys to succeed on the final exam so we can all have a great, brand new 2019. So make sure you know how Section 642E applies. It's not complicated, but you've got to be able to absorb that rule and make sure you understand it because you're going to see it again. How's that? And if you don't mind me saying, if you practice tax and you do any work in this area, you'll see it again. So that's why I want to make sure you see it, both in the classroom and outside the classroom. And we did say, and you should remember, that if you have a problem, get back to me, that there are so-called Keenan, K-E-N-A-N, Keenan kind, Keenan gains, right? That if an executor or trustee has to satisfy some sort of debt of the trust or an estate, it can trigger a recognition event, right, to the trust or estate. So these are the kind of things that I really need you guys to know. And we went through these, and I think that really summarizes it, but if there's something I'm missing, you gotta let me know and go through it again. All right, and then we started a discussion with chapter 4, and like I said, talking to one of my co-authors on this textbook I'm trying to put together, he pointed out that NYU Law School has an entire course, believe it or not, on grantor trust. Personally, I find that a little bit of overkill, but I think the salient points can be gathered in 2 classes, but apparently they put it up here and say, why not have a class on it? Let's just remind ourselves, chapter 4 starts off with a little bit of background on the assignment of income. Many of you have seen one or more of these cases in your income tax course. And the thrust of these cases was, and still is today, that if you control the income, control the trade, you should be taxed on the fruit that the tree generates, right? It's a very simple proposition. And we saw that in Elbring v. Horst and Lucas v. Earl. This notion of control, that even if you don't physically get the money, that nevertheless it may be subject to tax in your hands. I say, if you haven't seen the movie Jerry Maguire, it's the antithesis. If you recall the movie, there's a great scene where, I forget the football player's name, is show me the money, show me the money. You don't have to be shown the money here, you can still be taxed on it, right? All right, and then we spoke about the famous. This is one of those that many people know, but fewer people know. Let me just make an observation. What is the smallest country in Africa? Does anyone know? A little trivia, I can give you a little trivia tonight. Does anyone know? Anyone want to guess? What is the smallest country in Africa?
Addis Ababa is the capital of something, right?
I can't tell you, I can't even respond to that, but I can tell you the smallest country in Africa.
Madagascar. Madagascar?
No, Madagascar's pretty big. It's the Gambia, okay? And you might say, I'm embarrassed, this should not be on tape. This should self-destruct, but probably will be on the internet for the next 100 years. This is Africa, see? That's how embarrassing it is. There's Senegal, the country Senegal in West Africa. Okay, it's like that. And the Gambia is like a thin line. Okay? That's the Gambia. Okay? A lot of political turmoil in the Gambia. Okay? And I was there about 3 years ago with my family, and we were visiting Senegal, but when you're in Senegal, why not visit the Gambia? And in the Gambia, do you know what its claim to fame is?
Being
That's
the
where-
smallest country in the world.
Smallest country in the world? Well, no. Smallest country in Africa,
In
because
Africa,
the smallest
sorry,
country in the
Africa.
world
It's
is
the Vatican.
Vatican, thank you. But its claim to fame, and see, I'm going to date myself here. How many of you have ever seen the movie Roots? See? No. But as a kid, David, see? I saw the movie Roots. It's based on a book by Alex Haley.
He said he has seen it.
You too, Carla. Okay, me too. Anyway, when you go to the Gambia, the people there say, oh, you've got to come to the village of so-and-so. And why? Because this is where Alex Haley's from, and you can have your picture taken for $1 with his great niece.
Of
Now-
the Haley's Comet?
Hmm?
Who? Who's?
With Alex Haley, that's the author of the book, his
Oh.
great niece.
Not Haley of the Haley's Comet.
No.
Okay.
Why am I, this is a digression, you might say, what does this have to do with this case? Is that 20, 30 years ago, or 40 years ago, when the movie Roots was one of the biggest movies at the time, lots of people came to that little town to get their picture taken with the great aunt. In the year 2015, when I was there, probably in the year 1980, I'm going to make up, every 100 people who came there, 90 out of 100 knew about the movie and about this. In the year 2015, there's about 3 people out of 100. You can't make a living anymore based on the movie Roots in this village, is my point. The same is true of Clifford v. Commissioner. In yesteryear, everyone who practiced tax knew about the Clifford case, okay? It was on every practitioner. You walked into someone's office, and I didn't practice at the time, so this is before my time, but I would imagine that virtually every semi-wealthy person in the United States probably set up a Clifford Trust, okay? But you guys, before you came to this class, ever heard of a Clifford Trust? Anyone? All right, that's my point. It's going the way of the dodo bird, okay? But I think it has the relevance that you guys should remember that it was a genesis, one of those big genesises, catalysts behind the grantor trust rules, because Mr. Clifford set up this whole arrangement, had lots of indicia of control, and even though he didn't have direct ownership, the court said this was tantamount, right, to ownership, and therefore he was held to be taxed on the income the trust generated, right? And as a result of this case, Congress instituted a whole series of rules that we now know as the grantor trust rules. And it caused practitioners to create these trusts, which we'll talk about momentarily, that last 10 years in one day, or 10 years in 10 days, or something along those lines, okay? But again, I think it's important that you understand that those were the go-to kind of trust arrangements that virtually everyone had. That brings us up to where essentially we left off. Any questions thus far on grantor trusts? Okay? So let's just talk about one or two things, and then we'll get right into grantor trust. In terms of timing, our goal is to finish about half this chapter tonight. We'll see where the night takes us. As I pointed out to you, I have to moderate a panel in New Orleans in 2 weeks. So, and because I'm hoping most of you, maybe every one of you, I have 50 people now or so signed up for November 9th. It would be great if I could get 10 more. Love it. If you haven't signed up for November 9th, today's technically the last day.
I'm planning to sign up today.
You're what?
I'm planning to.
You're planning to?
Yeah.
You haven't done it yet?
No.
You've got to do it today, because I don't know how Eventbrite works, but I think it may stop after, I mean, it's supposed to end today, so I just don't want you to be locked out. So you can do it tonight.
You should have a door price, like maybe $10 more or something.
All right, we'll make it worth people's while, right?
I don't know, I'm just $5, whatever, whatever makes everyone happy.
One extra point on the final exam, how's that?
Yeah,
All right, now everyone's gonna sign
If
up.
I get 2 extra
Now,
points.
if you volunteer for the hypnotist, that will qualify for an extra point, because I need someone to volunteer. Shane, you're not gonna volunteer?
I don't think so.
I could use a
My
volunteer.
husband actually said that if I
Yeah, what if it's a
volunteer, he will not come. I need to promise that I will not volunteer because I volunteer for everything.
What
So-
if we volunteer a spouse?
That's perfect, that's by proxy. That works for me.
I
And you're still
saw one
getting
of those
the
shows
points.
when I was back in high school. I see what they do to people on the stage. I don't want to.
See, I never know if it's real or not, so this is my first opportunity, because anytime I've been in a crowd with hypnotists, it's always some person that I've never met before. It's always in a bigger crowd, and I don't know if that person's been set up or it's real.
It seems for real because they pick up really like someone like on the same randomly.
But did you know that person who got picked?
Some of you I know, like the first
And they
time
were
I-
picked, and they did it, and they said,
Yeah. So
all right, well, all right, so if you can plan to come, and B, I can't tell you with your spouse how you work it out, but maybe he'll volunteer. And he said if you volunteer, he won't come. He didn't say that.
Yeah, he didn't say that, but I think it's implied.
All right, well, we'll see what we can do. All right, so we have class, like I said, we have class tonight. We do have class on Friday, and I said I will bring dinner. I will try to make everyone happy. I will try to do my best. If you can't make it, I understand. V has been called to duty yet one more time, so don't read between the lines. I think it's important physically to be here. I think free dinner, but aside from that, I always think you absorb more by your physical presence. So if you can make it on Friday, that'd be terrific. So hopefully I'll see you guys Friday. and then we have class a week from tonight. And why don't we have two chapters that we're gonna cover. So we're gonna finish, ideally, grantor trust this upcoming Friday. And then, in my perfect world, I told you, do not read chapters 5 and 6 in the textbook. You guys are gonna be my first eyes. I apologize in advance, it's gonna be a little bit unrefined, but I sent you the chapters dealing with charitable trust, so why don't we do the charitable trust next? Okay, give you a good, fingers crossed, good overview on charitable trust. And then our last class together, I forget the date, it's like November 27th, we'll do IRD, and then we have a final exam. So in my perfect world, we will have covered, I think, everything you need to know about subchapter J, and then some, okay? More than you bargained for. And you really should, I hope, be ready to do a little work in this area and be able to answer clients' questions. That's at least my aspirations. Any questions logistically or otherwise? Lydia, you ready?
Good.
Good? You got bottled water. You need a little coffee there, Lydia. It's been a long Wednesday, right?
No, I had plenty of coffee today.
You had too many coffees today? Need one more. One more. All right, any other things? We're good? All right, so let's talk about grantor trust. You should open up to code section 671. Let me read some notes I have. So, grantor trust refers to a trust over which a person has retained sufficient interest or power that for tax purposes he's treated as the owner of the property. As the owner, he must report the income earned by the property directly on his individual tax return. In other words, the trust does not report the income on the Form 1041, right? So that's the bottom line. And we'll talk more next class about the implications. Now, I said, there's a two-step process. The first part of the process is identify what is a grantor trust. And the second part of the process is to talk about the tax implications. Okay? So, and again, next class we'll be talking about more the tax implications. Now, where are the identification sections? Well, you can really, for our purposes, 673, 674, 675, 676, 677, 678, okay? There's 6 code sections that are going to identify what is a grantor trust. And what the authors do, I see Alicia holding up her fingers like me. Was that right? I hope I can count on my fingers correctly. All right. I wasn't sure if my kindergarten teacher served me well.
I'm sure you learned it before you went to kindergarten.
I hope so, but I'm not sure. All right. So we have these 6 code sections, and then we have code section 671 that talks about the implications of being a grantor trust, and code section 672 that provides definitions. And just to make sure you understand that in yesteryear, under the Clifford decision, it was one of those weighing processes, like did the taxpayer have more indicia of control than not? These rules take that away. In other words, you either are or you're not. A court cannot find, or a court can't hold that you're a grantor trust because the court believes you have enough sufficient indicia of control. In other words, you either are identified under the 6 code sections just enumerated, or you're not. There's no, courts have no more leeway to decide that you have sufficient control, okay? So there's no more that, well, what's the economic reality? The assignment of income doctrine is still alive and well. So the regulations 671-1C. 671-1C says, nothing in these rules in any form or fashion subverts the assignment of income doctrine. Code section 672, like we said, has some important definitions. And if you open up to code section 672, adverse party. The term adverse party means any person having a substantial beneficial interest. I have the word substantial underlined in red. Substantial beneficial interest in the trust, which would be adversely affected by the exercise or non-exercise of the power which he possesses respecting the trust. That's a adverse party. A non-adverse party is the converse. Means any person who's not an adverse party. And I think everyone, so try to get the definition right of who's an adverse party, and if you do, you get a 2-for-1 special because you know who is non-adverse. So, quick example, if you have a trust that says income to A for life, remainder to B, and their grantor can only revoke with A's consent, okay? Get the visual? Income to A for life, remainder to B. So that means if I set up a trust for Alicia's lifetime benefit, remainder to EK, and I can only revoke the trust with Alicia's consent, she's not going to be too happy, right? To consent, because if she consents, that means her income interest disappears, right? Everyone agree? So she's going to be considered an adverse party. With respect to the income, remember, I only gave her an income interest. So she's an adverse interest as to the income, not as to the principal. Now, if I, same thing, where we say income to A for life, meaning income to Alicia, remainder to EK, and Alicia's the trustee. Is Alicia, and in this case, she could revoke. And in this case, excuse me, I'm sorry about that. In my example I just gave you, I can still revoke, but Alicia's the trustee. And just keep in mind, the trustee is not adverse there, because the trustee has to fulfill fiduciary duties in that context. So the fact that Alicia is trustee should not change the outcome of that case.
So in the first case, I need to give permission.
Right. In the first case, you need to give permission, you're not apt to give it, right? In the second case, I can just revoke, and you can't stand in my way, even though you're the trustee. So you're not adverse. I can just revoke it. Now, what's a related or subordinate party? take a look at 672C. The purpose of this subpart, the term related or subordinate means any non-adverse party who is the grantor's spouse, if living with the grantor, any one of the following. And you guys have seen this kind of thing before. Where? Code section 267, right? 267B. And elsewhere. But the grantor's father, mother, issue, brother or sister. Issue, by the way, means children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren. Brother or sister, an employee of the grantor, a corporation, or any employee of the corporation in which the stock holdings of the grantor and the trust are significant from the viewpoint of voting control, a subordinate employee of the corporation in which the grantor is an executive. Do not worry, by the way, anything to deal with foreign trust or foreign estates. We're not holding anyone accountable on any of that stuff. All right, so that gives you an idea of related or subordinate, and not surprisingly, related and subordinate, we see this all the time in tax. At any time there's a related or subordinate party, there's an opportunity for potential collusion, right? If there's an opportunity for collusion, the tax effects need additional scrutiny, or they may not be respected at all. All right, so we're gonna just go through and each one of the 6 code sections, and for exam purposes, make sure you can identify what is a grantor trust, and then on Friday, this upcoming Friday, we'll look at the consequences of being a grantor trust. Some of the consequences come alive just through the identification process. Take a look at code section 673. A, the grantor shall be treated as the owner of any portion of a trust in which he has a reversionary interest in either the corpus or the income therefrom, if, as at the inception, that portion of the trust, the value of such interest exceeds 5% of the value of such portion. Okay, that's the general rule. There is an exception that's found in 673B. In the case of any beneficiary who is a lineal descendant, the grantor and holds all the present interest, the grantor shall not be treated, emphasis on the word not, be treated under subsection A as the owner of such portion, solely by reason of a reversionary interest in such portion, which takes effect upon the death of such beneficiary before the beneficiary attains age 21.
What does reversionary mean?
That means coming back. It reverts back, comes back. And the simplest example is to, if you don't mind me saying, looking at the old rules. Okay? Looking at the old rules. Because the old rules are based on the Clifford case. 673 is new, and I'll put the word new in quotes. It used to read that if a trust were in excess of 10 years of less, or 10 years or more, that it would not be treated as a grantor trust. If it were 10 years or more than 10 years, not 10 years or more than 10 years, it would not be treated as a grantor trust. So look at page 263. Now, for exam purposes, I'm not going to test you on this, but I think it's worthwhile because to understand this, because a lot of the cases we look at are based on this old law. page 263, under former 673, says old section 673 provided that a grantor would be treated as the owner of any portion of a trust, the possession or enjoyment of which will or may reasonably be expected to revert to the grantor within 10 years of the creation. It goes on to say, 673 thus constituted a major exception to the assignment of income rules. If one was willing to separate oneself from property for more than 10 years, one could, with a congressional blessing, avoid taxation on the income from that property. So if I set up a trust, put in $1 million, and I had that $1 million payable to V for 10 years, and 10 years one day comes back to me, reverts to me, I had a reversionary interest. And if you remember Hellring v. Horse, where someone peeled off interest coupon, did the court respect that? No. They said, hey, you held on to the trade, you're going to be taxed on the fruit. But here, congressional blessing semi-overruled that case and said, hey, I'm willing to part with the property, right? I'm for more than 10 years. I gave it to V for 10 years and one day. And she gets the income, she will be taxed on it. And after that, the property would revert back to me. Very common device. Everyone got that? Because you're going to see a lot of cases with that.
Now it doesn't matter 10 years, it's just 5%.
Now, that rule has been obliterated. Now, Solid sets up the same kind of trust arrangement with V as the beneficiary. At what point, how long does the trust have to be in order for V to be subject to tax and not me to be subject to tax on the income? How long?
21 years? Was that?
21 years?
No?
No, they don't have,
Say again?
they don't have a year's requirement, right?
It's not a year's requirement. Make it up. How long do you think the trust has to be in order to qualify where I'm going to have less than a 5% reversionary interest? How many years?
99 years.
That's a long time.
One
but
lifetime.
you're definitely right. The
Is it
trust is
one lifetime?
Really?
One person lifetime, one lifetime.
one at a time, meaning,
No, one lifetime, which is one person. whereas-
well, depends on V's life, right?
Yes,
Expectancy, life expectancy.
life expectancy. So it's one.
Right. Well, we could have a term of years, or it could be for life. But what is the other factor that's going to play into whether or not the reversionary interest is worth 5%? What else is going to play a role in that? The interest rate, right?
Oh, yeah.
Interest rates, right? Because the higher the interest rate, and the interest rates, by the way, are spelled out under Code Section 7520, okay? Interest rates are spelled out in Code Section 7520. By the way, I just saw, and you guys should, some days I like to think I know some code sections, but apparently, you guys see in yesterday's paper, someone just won the World Scrabble. Did you guys see that? This guy won. Not only did he win in English, but he won in French, and it's not even his native tongue. He just picked up a French Scrabble dictionary and committed all the words to memory. So he won. I mean, it's incredible to win in one language, but to win in a second language is pretty amazing. So if you Google Scrabble winner, it's very, very impressive. That, again, I was impressed in one language. How about a second language? Anyway, but it will depend on interest rates, right? And if the interest rates, if you recall, I'm setting up this trust with $1 million for V's benefit. And we say there's two factors, the length of time and the interest rate, right? If interest rates are high, will that make my reversionary interest small or large? If interest rates are high. The higher the interest rate, go ahead, Karen.
Well,
The higher the interest rate, the,
higher your reversionary interest, your reversionary, yeah.
No,
no,
isn't it
it's
lower?
the exact opposite.
Sorry.
The higher the higher the interest rate, the smaller the reversionary interest.
Oh, because it's just an exception.
Because more income is going to,
You,
yes. Okay.
yes, the income beneficiary. So if interest rates, we were like Brazil, name some country that has high inflation. Let's say 95% inflation, like out of control inflation.
Turkey.
And I set up with
Turkey.
Turkey. Name your country that's falling apart, okay? Go ahead, Javier.
I would say Venezuela is one of them.
Venezuela,
Venezuela.
absolutely,
Absolutely.
good choice. Is that in that context, hey, if I have to wait 5 years or 10 years to get the property back, it may be worth 1% of what I contributed, right? Because in a highly inflationary time period, if I get back my original principal, that can be worth much, right? Everyone agree? Ming, you got that? You good? We're going to see some examples of this, so I'm going to work through this. But just for your notes, higher the interest rate, the smaller the reversionary interest. In today's environment, let's say for the last 15 years where interest is really historically maintained. In fact, interest rates have been hovering about 1%, right? Everybody agree? Truth, the code section 7520 rate, right, Marsh, is probably only about 2%. So it's not a big number. And that being the case, I would have to probably set up this trust possibly for 99 years to have a reversionary interest that was smaller than 5% because the going interest rate is so low.
So 99 is correct?
No, it's not necessarily. We're going to see. But I'm just making the observation that it's probably not far off in today's interest environment, right? All right. So, yeah, how can I resist? You guys are chomping at the bits to see this, so why not? Let's take a look, and we can answer that question, B. So let's take a look. If you guys took now, if you had the 2019 version, I can tell you the page number. If you don't have the 2019 version, I can tell you where to look. Look at regulation 20.2031-7D. I'll repeat, 20.2031-7D, table B.
What page is that on?
Oh, I apologize. 1628.
2018, 16, 18.
What page is it for the 2018 version?
16, 18.
1618. Okay, everyone got that? 1618 for the 2018 version, and 1628 for the 2019 version. Everyone have those pages now?
Wait, say that
Can you repeat the number again?
Okay, let's 2018 version of the
No,
code.
I don't have the page, just regulation.
Okay, regulation 20.2031-7D. And who can't find it now? Lady, what version do you have? 18? And everyone have it? You have table B. It's entitled Term Certain Remainder Factors Applicable after April 30th, 1989. All right? If the trust, how many years do you have to go out based on this page at an interest rate of 6%? How many years do you have to go out to have a smaller than 5% reversionary interest? And let's make the interest rate is 6%. Let's say.
Where? 6%?
Yeah, 6%. How many years do you have to go out to have less than a 5% reversionary interest?
52?
11.
52? Do you agree?
Oh, sorry.
Young Hung, do you agree? I can't hear you.
I think it's after 11 years.
You think it's 11 years?
From 12 years, the rate of
50.
That's a 49% interest.
Yeah, 53.
We're talking about 6% interest rate, right?
Yeah, 6%.
Yeah, 52.
52.
Or slightly, somewhere between 51 and 52.
52. Let's use 52.
is it less than 5%?
Yeah, because that's that's 0.048316, right? You see it? Everyone see it? I can't answer Alicia on
You were looking at 5%?
6%. So you've got to go down, all the way down to where it's 0.04. Can't be 0.5 there, right there. All right, everyone got it? And I just took a yellow magic marker, guys. I mean, you guys can, you can't do this, Alicia, but everyone else can. If you go down to 53 years, if interest rates were 5.8%, no, that doesn't work, I apologize. You gotta go down to 54 years, and then if it's 54 years and the interest rates were 5.8, it would work. You see, anything that is less than 5%, there's a little triangle towards the bottom right, right? That all those numbers, right, are less than 5%. Lydia, you see that? You look like you got it, right? David, you got it?
Yep.
Little triangle. EK, you got it? Everyone's got it, right? All right. So, and where do you find the interest rate? I was going to,
IRS webpage?
well, you can go in and just Google.
The
Does
Federal
anyone,
Reserve.
are you on Google now?
Oh, yeah.
Can you just Google October 2018 75/20 rate? 2018 75/20 rate. And Karen's doing it too. Who gets it first?
Probably her because mine is Wi-Fi.
Everyone getting it?
3.4.
3.4. Okay? So you can tell there that we're probably in the neighborhood of maybe having to go out 75 years or so, at least in this interest rate environment, before we're going to have less than a 5% reversionary interest, right? Everyone see that? We're not even given the tables. The tables don't even go that far. Now, if you turn the page and interest rates start climbing steeply, if the next page shows 6.2, 6.4, 6.6, and it goes up to 8.0, well, in that case, if the interest rates were, say, 8.0, how many years do you have to go out? No.
Almost 6.0.
39.
39 years, right? Everyone agree? 39 years. Shane, you got that? Shane?
What percent are we talking about?
8%.
8% going on 39 years?
You just have to go out 39 years.
Yeah.
Yes? Okay, everyone see that? And again, this time I have a much bigger triangle, right? Because this time interest rates are much higher, so it's going to create a much bigger triangle, right, of permissible years. They go from, on this page, 39 to 60 years. Right? Okay? Now, so we could create a trust. I could create it. Anyone in this room or our clients could create a trust for what's called a term of years. Or, alternatively, we could do it for the lifetime of a particular beneficiary and then say, using my example of V, we could do it for V's lifetime, but upon her demise, it reverts back to me. So we'd have to compute, given V's lifetime, or given her age, excuse me, what is the reversionary interest? And no shocker here, we'll turn on her age, and what else? Interest rates. So, if you could, turn 2 more pages to table S. 2 more pages to table S. And if at least, Shane, what page is it on the 28th version?
1623.
1623, and in the 2019 version, it's page 1633, okay? Everyone have those 2 different pages depending on which edition of the book you have. And if you do have table S, you can see when, given if interest rates were 4.4%, what is the youngest the person can be? Not 4.4%, I apologize. If interest rates were 5%, what's the youngest a person could be for you to get reversionary interest less than 5%?
You mean the oldest?
The oldest, I guess, yes.
8.
8 years old, right? Everyone see that? If you're 8 years old and interest rates are 5%, then the reversionary interest, if B was 8 years old, okay, and I had a reversionary interest, and I set up a trust for her benefit, she's 8 years old, and I say after her demise, I get the property back, that interest would be worth about 4.8%. Everyone agree?
And then in this way, you would not be taxed as a grant?
It would not be a grant or trust. As to the income, we'll talk about the principal amount in a moment, okay? But you can see with interest rates at 3.5, you would have to still be in utero for it possibly to work. It just wouldn't work. I don't think you could have less than a 5% interest.
Or people need to live to 150 years.
But the actual table, they don't take that into account.
Yeah.
They do not take it into account. All right?
What are these, like, insurance, mortality thing?
Yeah, they're mortality tables.
Mortality thing.
It's kind of scary when you start looking at your ages and your mortality rates at different ages. All right, but everyone get how to figure out lesson, and I will try to highlight as we talk through grantor trust rules, which ones come up in practice and which don't. You should know them all, but truth, I can't recall ever setting up a trust which had a reversionary interest back to the grantor. Because people who set up trusts, they set it up for their spouse, they set it up for their children or grandchildren, and the philosophy has always been they want to keep it outside their estate, right? Everyone agree? That's one of the main driving forces for these trusts, or they want to protect their spouse, or they want to protect their children. But these are monies that they psychologically feel like they can shed and they'll never need it. Like I'll never set up a trust where someone says, gee, I don't know in a few years if I'm going to have enough money to live on. They're not the go-to person. Oh, let me set up an irrevocable trust. Oh, don't worry, we'll give you a reversionary interest. It doesn't happen. All right? So I just want to share with you that this gets back to in my discussion of the Gambia. Yeah, by the way, it's known, I think they refer to it as the tongue. Like this, Senegal is known as the mouth of Western Africa, and the Gambia is referred to its tongue. And I'm not kidding. So if you think that's a strange picture, there's actually reference to that. But my point is, in yesteryear, there was a lot of popularity with these reversionary interests because they served a tremendous tax tool where you could defeat the assignment of income doctrine. There was no such thing as a kiddie tax, right? That was a somewhat recent vintage. And fairly wealthy people were able to run roughshod over the progressive rate structure by setting up Clifford trusts like that, right? 10 years in one day, and psychologically, they knew they were gonna get the money back, right? The income was gonna be taxed at the lower rate, and after 10 years in one day, they get the money back, and voila. The practitioners, it was an easy way to make a day's wage at the expense of the government, right? But I'm telling you that the popularity was of yesteryear. It's important to know, I think, but just be forewarned, this does not come up regularly in practice, okay? You'll hear a lot about grantor trust in practice, but I'm just telling you the go-to methodology is not, and I'll tell you what is, but let's wait for that, is not to set up trust with reversionary interest, for sure. Okay? We did talk about 673B, this limited exception that the grantor's reversionary interest only takes effect upon the death of a lineal descendant before that person attains age 21. So that's not going to defeat grantor trust status. I just pointed out, would Clifford, the Clifford case, violate Code Section 673 as it's written in in the year 2018? How would Clifford be rolled upon? And if you recall, how long was the Clifford Trust for? How many years? I think it was 5 years. And that being, my point is, certainly the Clifford case would run afoul of today's Code Section 673, okay? So let's look at the problems on page, let's take a look. The problems on page 266, okay? In 1985, G creates an inter vivos trust. And again, just to remind you of the lingo, as compared to a testamentary trust, right? Okay. That's a trust created during lifetime. All the income is to be paid to grantor's sister for 9 years. Thereafter, the trust is to terminate, and all the principal is to be paid to the grantor. Does 673 treat the grantor as the owner of any portion of the trust? And this, again, under prior law, not current law, under prior law, is the grantor treated as the grant? Is this considered a grantor trust? Alicia's vigorously shaking her head north to south. Yes.
Because it was less than 10 years.
It's less than 10 years. Assuming the same facts as problem 4-1, except the trust is to terminate after 10 years and 30 days. So Alicia, since you're on a roll, is that a grantor trust or non-grantor trust?
Only according to the old law.
According to the old law, which is fine. Again, you should
Hold
be,
on. According to the old law, it's non-grantor, I guess, and according to the new law, it is grantor.
well, we'll get to that in a moment. Let's just,
Okay.
for your notes, for everyone's notes, it would not be considered a grantor trust. But again, in bold and in red, just make sure your notes reflect under old law, right? Because the trust was set up in 1985. Assuming the same facts in 4-1, except the trust is to terminate on the death of sister. So in that case, what do you do with respect to, under the old law? Did it matter about the age of the beneficiary? Was that ignored? It was ignored. So in that case, it would not be. This is pointed out on page 265 under death of income beneficiary. 3 lines down. Thus, a grantor is content to delay his or her reversion until the death of the income beneficiary is not treated as the owner of any portion of the trust under 673, regardless of whether the life expectancy of the income beneficiary exceeded 10 years. So, and I guess the author's point of whether or not as we're 99 years old when the trust was created. All right, so your answer is not a grantor trust, right, for 4-3. Everyone agree? We have authority under old law. Notice, for your notes, the important point is 4-4 going forward, because for exam purposes, I'm not going to test anyone on prior law. Right? 4-4. This year, G creates an inter-vivos trust. All the income is to be paid to G's sister for 10 years and 30 days. Sounds promising theoretically. Thereafter, the trust is to terminate, and the principal is to be paid to G. Does Code Section 673 treat G as the owner of any portion? And in this case, what do you think? Clitty and Ping, see if you're really with Clitty. What do you think, Clitty? Grantor trust or not a grantor trust?
Say no.
You say it's not a grantor trust. Think, agree or disagree? Okay? No, pink. Oh,
Me? Ah,
pink.
good. It's me, right? It's for the older law or the
No,
older
current law.
Current law is granted.
You say it's grantor trust. Why?
The current, because the principal, it's applied for all the principal to be paid to G.
So just put it in the language of the code.
673.
673, but why is it a grantor trust? If I'm talking to a client or you're talking to the IRS, why?
The reversionary.
Well, the reversionary interest exceeds 5%, right?
Over.
The reversionary interest, we just looked at the tables, right? And unless the interest rates were at least maybe 14, 15, 16%, I don't know what, it'd have to be very, very large, because anything we looked at, it would not qualify, right? 10 years. So unless interest rates were really, 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 really high, it's a grantor trust. Everyone agree? And our taxpayer, G, would be taxed on all the income that this trust generated, right? And that makes sense, right? Because the taxpayer is just giving up the property a little bit of, small, giving it up for a few years and then getting it all back. And at least, again, query whether or not this rule is still necessary. Again, if you recall, if I were king for the day, I would get rid of all the grantor trust rules, because remember, trusts now are taxed at essentially the highest rate, so the fear of yesteryear, where people would play games, is no longer. And also with respect to children, there's a kiddie tax. So the games that people used to play really aren't there. So grantor trust, but putting that as issue aside, your notes, the reversionary interest here would undoubtedly exceed 5%, unless, parenthetically you could say, unless interest rates were very, very high. And therefore it's a grantor trust, period. Lydia, you got that?
Yeah.
High reversionary interest. 4-5, how long must the trust in 4-4 endure if 673 is not to treat G as owner of any portion of the trust? Okay, so if you recall, V spelled this out, right? V, how long did the trust have to be depending on the interest rates?
Oh.
You said 52, and
Yeah,
what was the interest
52.
rate at that?
6.
6%. If the interest rates were currently 6%, the trust would have to go at least 52 years, right? For the reversionary interest to be less than 5%, right? In your notes, so you want to say that the trust would have to go at least, what do we say? If the interest rates were 6%, 52 years, and we would point out to you, or I would point out to you, that any capital gains, remember the income, if this trust were 52 years long, the income would be taxable to the sister, right? But the capital gains, which are going to inure, they're going to revert back to the grantor, the capital gains, would be taxable to the grantor. So, for your notes, what's my authority? Code section 677A2. I'll repeat. So your answer should be bifurcated here. The first part of your answer should say, if the trust is 52 years, when interest rates are 6%, the reversionary interest is less than 5%, and hence the sister, right, Justin, would be taxable on the income. Semicolon. Conversely, comma, with respect to any capital gains, the grantor would remain taxable on such under the authority of Code Section 677A2.
But if you made it out to that far, why would the grantor be capital gains? Why would the trust be taxed?
I'm sorry? We made it 52, but ultimately, in year 53, Solid's going to get the property back, and all those capital gains are going to inure to my benefit, right? Because they're not payable to me. She only gets the income from the trust.
But doesn't the trust just pay the tax every year? You're gonna wait till.
No. The trust is going to distribute the income. He's going to get K1.
Just the
What?
other kind of income.
Oh, say that again?
I'm sorry, I thought you said just the other kind of income, like dividends, whatever, not the capital gains.
The dividends, all the income, fiduciary accounting income under the Principal and Income Act, payable to me. She's going to be taxed on it. Capital gains are not going to be paid to me.
Yeah, but so I'm saying, isn't the trust gonna be taxed on the capital gains every year?
It will be.
If they're gonna pay it every
Oh,
year,
wait,
then
I
you're gonna say.
apologize. I apologize. No. I stand corrected. I said that too quickly. Every year, any capital gains will be taxable to me because it inures to ultimately to my benefit. So it's a grantor trust to me under Code Section 677A2. So capital gains will still end up on my tax.
Oh, okay.
That's what I meant to say.
Oh, okay.
Okay, everyone understand Karen's point? Is that the first 52 years, V will be taxable on its income because the reversionary interest is less than 5%. Capital gains, I'm still the benefactor of that, right? I still have that indicia of control. And Code Section 677A2 memorializes that. It says to the extent that's going to flow back to me and inure to my benefit, I am currently taxed on that. Again, check out, and we will, Code Section 677A2. We're going to look at that either at the end of today or on Friday. What's going on?
I'm not so clear for 4-2 and 4-3, compared with 4-1.
Well, 4-2 and 4-3 are just old law. Okay? It's under the old law, not the current law. Because they're all dealing with 1985, when there was a more than 10-year rule in effect.
But how about 4-1? It's less than.
Which answer? 4-4?
No, but how about 4-1? It is less than 10 years.
then it's considered a grantor trust as to the whole.
It is, right?
Yeah, 4-1 under old law. Okay, 4-6, this year a grantor creates an inter vivos trust. All the income is to be paid to child. G's minor child for child's life. Upon C's death, the trust is to terminate. If C dies prior to attaining age 21, the principal is to be paid to G if living, otherwise to G's estate. Okay? The 673 treat G as the owner of any portion of the trust.
Probably not.
And if you say not, what's your authority?
Oh. 673 probably. I'm not sure why.
Well, keep in mind that G has a small reversionary interest here, right? If the child dies before age 21, it reverts back to the grantor, right?
Right. But what are the odds?
The odds are slim, but they could be, we looked at the tables, right? If in a low interest rate environment, it could be greater than 5%, right? But code section 673B says you don't need to treat this as a grantor trust.
And also not for principal, because principal goes to C's estate originally.
Hold on. Until, in theory, until the child reaches age 21, code section 677A2 would likely make the grantor taxable on any capital gains. Because there is a reversionary interest there, at least for those years, in which theoretically the grantor could be the beneficiary. So for your notes, again, code section 673B insulates this from being grantor trust status, however, semicolon, however, comma, code section 677A2 to make the grantor taxable on the capital gains until the child attains age 21. Or there's 7. This year, G creates an inter vivos trust. All the income is to be paid to child, G's child for C's lifetime. Upon C's death, the trust is to terminate, and the principal is to be paid to G. Okay, so it's going to go back to G. C was 2 years old at the time the trust was created. The section 673 treat G as the owner of any portion of the trust. Now, what do we say if the child is 2 years old? Given the tables we saw, is the reversionary interest in excess of 5%? What did we learn?
Now we have to do like unborn yet.
Yeah, we learned that
Or
at least until the interest rates,
like
Up to 4.4.
well, it depends. I mean, right now, let's suppose interest rates were 6.2%. Well, maybe, 1 second, let me. If it was 2 years old and interest rates were 4.6%, would we be okay? Everyone agree we'd be okay, right? So if it gets a little bit more inflationary, interest rates are at 4.6%, you should be okay.
But that applies only to the income though, yes, not.
Only to the income, and once again, Code Section 677A2 would make G taxable on the capital gains. Just one other housekeeping chore that I meant to raise with people. I have this up here. If anyone is interested, on November 16th, every year the Essex County has a tax seminar, all morning tax seminar, and every year Rutgers sponsors a table. This is November 16th, so it's 2 weeks from this Friday. If you're free and you want to attend for free, the only thing you have to do is during breakfast sit in front of a banner marked Rutgers and say good things about the tax program. Okay, so if anyone's interested, it would be great if you could attend, and I can get up to 4 people in probably for free. So if you're interested, just let me know during the break, and I have 1 person already. I could probably get 2 or 3 or 4 more people in depending. All right, so Alicia looks like she's interested, but if there's anyone else, let me know. Any questions on Code Section 673, guys? All right, I think this is a natural break point. I mean, I could start at 674, but clearly go get some coffee, okay? All right, so why don't we take 8 or 9 minute break, and I will see everyone afterwards. And anyone interested in signing up, aside from Alicia, for this tax seminar, just write your name on the back of the sheet of paper, okay?